a little bit again. Some of this is going to be familiar. We're obviously going to kind of not rehash the combined project, but we're going to go through what the process was and share that and kind of go a little bit more in depth as to what drove some of those. The agenda here, just the project approach, the design approach that we employ and we use on all of our projects. Going to discuss a little bit of that operational requirements that drives the program, how we test fit the sites. So we'll see that, what the site selection process is, and what we typically undertake. And we'll it'll storyboard out what we did to lead to where we came to the quarry road site, and then some of the construction costs and what that is. Again, focused more on the industry, less on where we were in November. So first of all, our design approach. This is a key part for us and kind of one of the things that makes our process a little bit more unique. We want to make sure that we're doing the due diligence for the community. So our process collectively begins with 2 individual questionnaires. I send to the police department. We're looking for about 8 to 10 years of data. That includes population fluctuations, that includes department male staff, female staff fluctuations, calls for service, number of arrests, so on and so forth. A lot of in-depth data of where they are today, or in this case, where they were in 2019. And then we're also looking back at 10 to 11 years. Also how their operations are structured. So that gets us a lot of that information so that we have that framework of history. We then plug that information in using a few analytical models. One of those is a model based on FBI standards for population. We use that to project out what is the station going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, or what will that look like. So that gives us kind of some of that anticipated growth for not only today's, but what's the future of the department going to look like size-wise. In this situation here, we'll come up a little bit more. It anticipated about, just trying to remember the numbers here, about 40 sworn officers active, and then we were anticipating anywhere between 50 to 60 employees as part of that future growth, and I can explain some of that a little bit later. But I'll let Bob describe his process, which is, again, a little bit along the same lines and similar, but just a little bit different because of the fire department service is different than we do.
So with the fire department program, there's an analysis of each room. There's a diagram, a detailed diagram of each room that's going to be in the building, all of the equipment that's going to be in the room, rather than just arbitrarily saying, oh, 200 square feet, I'll do this, or something like that. That document, which was done in 2015 and then revised back in 2018, if I remember correctly, it was about 68 pages long. And in the process of analyzing rooms, I bring a library of 1,100 floor plans, room plans, and about 800 or 900 photos of all those rooms, so that the fire department has the ability to visualize the space and say, yes, we're going to have that kind of equipment, and we'll have that number of people in the space working. And just take, for instance, contaminated turnout here. We'll follow this particular number of steps through the building. And contaminated firefighters will take those number of steps through the building, and everything comes out clean at the other end. So that's typical of how that is. I have done that on all of the 200 plus stations, and I lecture nationally on that topic too, about how to do it.
So as I said, this process is really spreads apart. We look at things individually, and then once we get those programs, we bring them back together. And Bob will send his program over, and we'll look at them, collectively. We'll send ours to Bob. Where are the symbiotic relations? What rooms are labeled the same, have the same functions, and we look at creating a third program, which is ultimately how can we get that combined, and is it a greater efficiency at a combined facility, right? Simply, there are functions, and again, it varies by department, so this is where we go back to both both departments and we sit, what do you feel like, very simply, we present, this is where we see a lot of departments share. Is there more or is there less that Ridgefield Police and Fire are willing to share and work a little bit more symbiotic in that program reduction, if you would, or combination? This one, there was a little bit more than most, but they were willing to come together and share that space in this program. So we were able to come back and get that combined program that is, reduced fairly well from the two individuals. Some of the questions that were sent over were asking is it premium, average, or minimal type spaces? I'd also venture into, is it required, needed, or wanted? And there's a mix of that in all of them. Heavily focused on the premium or the required, and because it's required doesn't mean it's premium, but there are spaces in there that we're going to look at that are more premium type spaces. And what to explain that and how we're looking at premium spaces is areas that you want to invest in that space for safe operation. Decontamination is one of those spaces. You want to make sure that you have proper clearances around that equipment, you have proper ventilation. Another one would be the apparatus bay, just to name a couple, is you want proper clearances around the truck for safe operations. If I venture into PD, you're looking at some premium spaces within the detention block, processing, evidence handling, things of that nature. Average spaces, those become like offices where we can get a good mix. Because it's a 24/7 facility, we want to make sure that it functions with little downtime to no downtime for cleaning and maintenance. And then where we can use minimal or a minimal functionality is something like a storage room, right? And the want area of that would be something that may be an amenity. Just trying to blank at this point, but we can kind of move on, and I'm sure we'll circle back to that.
Let me just offer another thing. So they're phrased that way, not meaning that therefore you don't need the storage area, but the storage area is a cheaper space to make. And somebody could say, well, we don't need to store that much stuff, we can store lesser stuff or more stuff, and those are conversations that occur all the time. But in certain spaces, like the one on the left there, which is the SCBA fill station, you absolutely have no latitude in that. The equipment that's going in there is known, the amount of space that's needed to store the air bottles is known, whether there's one or two people working in there is known, and that defines the space.
A lot of, in these last couple of slides, kind of just framework discussions that we're having with the department. So these are the guidelines that both of us use kind of independently. Obviously, some of the more centric to Fire, Bob is using. We're both using the building codes, obviously, because we have to build the code. And then I'm using some of the areas like the IACP, which is International Association of Chief of Police, and the police organizations, as we're talking about some of the police department functionality that we're bringing to the discussion for operations. One thing to note is, let's see if my laser's gonna work here. These two manuals over here have recommendations and standards, if you would, for what to put into spaces. And that building that you see there, that's the FEMA guideline, that actually features our building that we did together, one of the first ones, which is the holding public safety. There on the cover.
Another thing I'd like to point out, NFPA, my co-worker is on 3 of their committees. And 2 of them have to do with firefighter health and safety issues in the building, and the 3rd one has to do with communications, because he has a background in that prior to coming to work with us. So
again, I wanted to make sure we included this because a lot of times as we're speaking, we speak in alphabet soup acronyms, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, just to clarify what Paul was talking about there. But I wanted to make sure that this was available not only to you folks, but to the folks at home so you can understand the guidelines there. Go ahead, Paul.
So What you see on the left is a common problem, and I believe that's a picture now.
That's Richfield's department.
So clearly, you need a safe amount of space between the vehicles. So what you see on the right is our standard dimension. It's not an excessive space. It's not wasted space. There's 8 foot clear between the trucks, and that's it. And it's funny, the picture makes it look like less than 8, but it is 8 feet. And you know, in the front, from the front of the truck to the garage door is 5 feet. From the back of the truck, there's more flexibility because we don't know over time if you'll end up with longer trucks and things like that. So there's a little, there's somebody on day one, somebody might say, well, there's some waste space back there, but you'll see a slide in a little while showing the evolution of the size of trucks since the 1950s to now, how much they've grown. We don't want to put you in we want you to have a 100-year building. So we don't know what the space behind the truck needs to be. So that's
Driving forces in here are, you know, part of the firefighters' daily activities is to maintain the equipment on the trucks. Some of them, got an awkward angle here. Some of them have roll-up doors, which obviously, you know, there's a benefit to the roll-up door as opposed to a swing door. But we want to make sure that there's safe ability to circulate and work in those environments on a daily basis.
Yes, even if both of them have a swing door open, you need to go and walk through.
The diesel exhaust, you know, we want to make sure that's all being captured. That's a, you know, OSHA and FBA guideline and regulation. And then just another quick note is because of these spaces, we also are making sure that there is readily available tools and useful items, like at the end of the photo there's a hose reel that's got a useful and daily use to make sure that the trucks are free and clear of contaminants and getting them so that's not off-gassing and getting circulated back into the rest of the station.
Yeah, the trucks come back highly contaminated with particles from combustion. And if they're not washed off in place and down the drain, they get back in the airstream. And if we don't do all of the requirements that we are told to do and actually do, creating sealed spaces, you know, it's hot zone, warm zone, cold zone. If you don't have that airlock between those particles, work their way into the living space. And there are reports where they go and measure the contents of those living spaces, and the numbers are very high if those things are not done correctly. Another simple thing that this video on the left image, you see the hose hanging down. If somebody's between the 2 trucks, that hose is going to grab the person if you don't have enough space between the trucks. So here you see your decon laundry on the left, and you see that the typical worst case thing we talk about. This is the ice machine. Am I looking at that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Yep,
ice machine?
yeah.
So you're contaminating the ice. There's a common presentation where somebody takes ice out of a machine that's like that, puts it in a glass Pyrex dish, lets it melt, and you see the oily film flow down. The air in the day is contaminated, and you can never combine human functions with that atmosphere. So on the right, you see just an example, a typical example of the decon laundry, and you see there's no trip hazards on the floor. We're controlling the coefficient of friction on the floor. We're controlling the cleanability of all the surfaces. These are just standard aspects of making these spaces efficient, healthy, safe. And we know exactly how many gallons of water are coming on the machine on the left. In the first 20 seconds, 25 gallons of water come out. And we need to address where that goes, and et cetera. And you'll see when you go in your station, when it's all done, everything's going to look clean and efficient. There'll be enough storage that there's nothing on the floor. Trip hazards are a big deal. I'm aware of 2 fatalities from trips or slips in apparatus space. And there was a case in Seattle with a $11.3 million settlement from an injury in the station.
Another thing with the decontamination area, you'll notice there's a redundancy in the extractor. That's this large silver equipment onto the left-hand side here, and then the dryer off to the right-hand side. That is there in preparation for when they have a call to get the gear that's coming back that is contaminated cleaned and turned over and ready for use at a rapid rate.
And the machine on the left will take 6 sets of gears, so that you've got 12 people coming back. That first cycle is taking care of all 12 of them. If you've got 20 people, then there's going to be 2 phases anyway, but you don't want to get a third machine for that purpose. We did a regional laundry for Loudoun County, Virginia. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an individual station, and typically 2 washers and 2 dryers is the solution. So it's a 65-pound capacity machine, 6 sets of gear. Here you see the hazards of being next to the truck when you're putting on your gear. The gear should be in its own isolated room with its own isolated ventilation system. People will argue which air is dirtier in the bay or in that room. The turnout gear, even after it's laundered, has a pretty significant rate of off-gassing of the hydrocarbons that got into the fire, because the characteristics of the fabric to protect the firefighter from burning or having steamy water come through and parboil them makes it very difficult to get these hydrocarbons out of the fabric. So you have to count on them evaporating continually. You have to count on capturing it and exhausting it. So that space is independently ventilated with a heat recovery ventilation system, and has to be carefully detailed. Chosen heat recovery ventilator that is just doing heat and not energy, because we can't inadvertently recover the exhausted poisons that are going out and make it through that recovery membrane. It's an energy recovery. Everything's done. I'll give you examples of the level of detail. It's all done at that level of detail.
And I don't recall if you mentioned it, being in an isolated room, this compared to being out in the bay, you're not gaining the additional contaminants of the diesel particulate from being within the bay. So as a secondary room, sealed, isolated, negative pressure, so that it's exhausting and not leaking back into the rest of the station, you don't get that that additional contamination that's affecting the firefighter.
And just so you can picture, when the truck is leaving, there's a point where the hose disconnects, and that tailpipe is still exhausting into the bay coming out the door. But worse is when the truck is backing in, because it's a longer time before somebody gets out of the truck, plugs in that hose and gets going. So the ventilation rates of the bay are set fairly high, 4 air changes, complete air changes a day. So if you walked in hours after an event had happened, the air would smell okay. But if you had instruments in there, you would see there's still toxins in the air. People are used to an old station like yours that stinks in the day after the truck is done. It'll never stink in there. You've got 20-foot ceiling, you have a lot of cubic feet of air per truck, so it's diluted. So you're not so conscious of what you're doing to yourself.
Switching a little bit of gears over to the police department side of things, the lobby has a few separate items. Some of these, the majority of these are relative to IACP recommendations, and then accreditation, both Connecticut standards and as well as KBA, which is another agency, and I forget all of the alphabets. That's why we put that on the first slide. But things like when you're coming to provide a statement, privacy. Privacy is not only just for the citizens that are coming to visit the station, privacy also helps to maintain the level of integrity in any case that may result from that exchange of information. So that's a key function that you want to make that is kind of set to make sure that you have that ability and that key exchange of information. We need to limit what the public can see from what the department's doing. That includes the surveillance cameras, community cameras, detention block, as well as any information that's being brought up on a computer screen. The next function here is kind of your existing PD has a roll call room that functions as also their training space. Can't fit the number of officers that is necessarily required to gain you free seats, so it's very limited. So this one photo actually fits for 2 photos in the new building, because you have your daily operational space, which is your roll call. That's the exchange of information at the start of each and every shift. That's a requirement any law enforcement agency, as well as a training space that's dedicated for just the increasing the effectiveness and the efficiency of your officers. It also allows you to bring, with that many seats, it allows you to bring an agency or a outside company in and provide both departments ultimately with free seats. So again, creating a little bit of operational cost savings long term, which is a standard practice we see with most companies. And that training function is part of their accreditation as well. Detention block, this is a risk area for any department. When you have, areas where officers are directly adjacent to somebody that they've arrested and they're operating in that proximity, there's bound to be some level of confrontation. So good separation, clear separation in a new facility. Materials that are, separation also allows enough safe circulation so that if you have somebody that's overly intoxicated, stumbling, tripping, falling, they're clear, they're not going to hit something and cause greater injury, especially if they get combative. And then also all of the materials in here are set so that they're easily cleaned and easily maintained for the department in the long run. I know a lot of that was a lot of background, but we want to kind of framework with where some of these standards are coming from. Modern decontamination.
So this is typical, this is not the exact layout of yours, but it's all the pieces you would expect. Gross decontamination, laundering, showering of the firefighters. There's a lot of study about the rate at which these particulates pass through the skin into the firefighters and have the only way out is through your lymphatic system and your circulatory system. And cancer rates are higher in the fire service than in the public. In fact, in the city of Boston, we did a study of their fire headquarters. There's a poster in there that says 68% of Boston firefighters will die of cancer. Now, that's a higher percentage than you're experiencing because they're more exposed to fires and things like that. And the number probably deals with some more older people. So things aren't that as bad as that now, but they're still very bad and need to be addressed. And this is our standard system. Turnout gear here. So the turnout gear comes through here, it gets grossly decon, gets laundered, gets dried, gets put back here, and that's its own isolated storage, ventilated storage area. Again, the showers, it's important, if you get, so there's no concrete proof about how quickly you need to shower. There's scientists doing research, but it's evolving. The sense is they should shower within 20 minutes at the latest of arriving back at the station. So they need to be able to work through that shower quickly, and you need to have enough stalls in there for that to work. And the cost of amortizing a shower stall is something like 35 or 50 cents for a household, an average household per year, in terms of what it is on your tax bill, in terms of the square footage in the shower versus the square footage of the building as a whole. So it's important. It is perhaps the single most important piece. Well, there are two of them. One is keeping the contaminated air from getting into the living space, but their bodies need to be cleaned. And, okay, that you understand, I'm making too much of a case of that. Okay.
So the evolution, Bob, if you want to say that, this just kind of shows a little bit of framework, if you would. The evolution of fire apparatus, when your station was built in the 1900s, mostly horse-drawn, very small equipment. In the 50s, you had about, just south of 300 square feet, and you get 2.5 times that in the modern engine, and then you go almost 3.3, a little over 3 times that for a ladder truck. So you can see where, the evolution of the fire service over the years of service, how that's starting to affect that Bay Area especially, and the proximity for work. Firefighters today do far more services than they did in the 50s, and far more than that than what was done in the 1900s when the station was built.
You know, we feel pretty comfortable that the width and height of the trucks are not going to increase much. You've got overpasses everywhere constructed. I don't think they're going to tear all those down to allow taller trucks through. So we feel pretty comfortable with the dimensions that we have for the day in terms of the future. Because clearly that's a gigantic change. And every station I've ever worked on came out of something like that. With some of them as old as yours with a horse-drawn equipment. And you know, the doors won't even let the modern trucks in or out.
So now we want to kind of bring this back to focus on, you know, understanding where all of the design parameters are set from. Just as a frame of reference, when we did the study in 2019, or the combined study, 32 firefighters, currently are at 36. So with that anticipated growth, and it was predicted to increase to 48. That anticipated growth, you're already starting to show that trend, which is kind of confirming some of what we suspected back in 2019. 2019, on the same side, police office department was about 41 sworn, about a 9% increase in officers. In that time frame, they're now up to, they just added 4 more to that, so now up to 45, if you would. There. And then, you know, just kind of hitting on a few, you know, tidbits of that growth space. Part of that, a good portion of that is in the lockers, right? In your locker rooms, and specifically for the police department is what I'm speaking towards, is in your locker room. We need to anticipate that growth. We also need to try and anticipate at that point in time what's going to be the diversity between male and female. So there's a little bit of padding that's put in there because we don't know what that diversity level is going to be. We worked with stations where they thought 10 was going to be great, and you know, that was in 2008, 2009, and last year they were calling us, we need to put an addition onto our women's locker room because we just hired 5 more female police officers. That dynamic of male and female is changing. We do try and employ what you'll see down here in the corner of the animation, you know, getting the locker rooms together so you don't have to, you can hit that number. If the magic number is 50, it's a combination of male female, right? If you don't have the males, they're in the female area. If we can devise it so that there's a partition that can shift, that makes it so we can be more efficient with that locker room layout, and use the spaces, use the lockers for each other, and just maintain the solid number there. So there is planned expansion. Just another quick point, there's a planned expansion in the program for investigations. Currently, there was 4 investigations when we did, detectives when we did the study. It was planned for 2 additional seats. Again, over 30 years when that would come. But as you add more staff, one other key point to bring in, you also have to add supervision over that staff. If you think about it as a paramilitary organization, which both departments are, a certain number of privates in the Army requires a sergeant, and that just keeps going, you know, up in the chain of command. So it's very similar in that scenario there. We also try to anticipate what some of the future growth areas in the industry. I do sit at that International Association of Chief of Police. I do sit on a committee that we're talking about those growth industries regularly. That's drones as first responders, that's real-time crime centers, and many more active, not investigations, but crime trends within the area so that you can see and follow that. Those are all functions that we have conversations with the department to make sure that we're including the right spaces, not only for today, but what they see that might be trending in Richfield in particular as part of that program. Okay, bringing that all back together, those individual programs, about 37,000 square feet for the police standing alone. They had an 11,000 square foot outbuilding. requiring about 3.5 acres of land for a standalone police station. Standalone fire was about 39,000 square feet. Outbuilding of 2250, also requiring a standalone area of about 3.5 acres to fit that program. That includes all the parking requirements for that, for both buildings. Looking at those as two individual.
Question, on the outbuilding for the standalone police, what's in that?
You beat me to it.
Okay, sorry.
That does come up a little bit later, but because it was, Dean talked about, is that included a 5-lane live fire range, which was something that was the department. They have to qualify annually every year, so it's a requirement. Doesn't have to be in a building. You can use outside facilities, but outside facilities are becoming more and more difficult for departments to train at. And we're seeing, our company is seeing more and more live fire ranges put into stations because they don't have that ability to go elsewhere. And it can become a revenue generator because some of the neighboring communities will say, you don't use your range, yeah, it's gonna cost you. So that's what was included in that one there. That totaled out to, if it was 2 individual projects, about 7 acres, 76,000 square feet, 13,250. At that point in time, when we did the combined facility, we looked at it, it was about 75,000 square feet for a combined facility, 6,000 square feet in outbuilding. It was at that point in time that the department made the concession and said we don't need the range, and they opted to pull that out of the project. But that totaled out to just around 5 acres of land. So you can see some of the the totals in that is kind of what kind of led to what we were talking about as a combined facility. So as I mentioned earlier, this is something that Bob and I have been doing since 2008, so almost 20 years together. And these are some of the examples of communities that we have used this methodology, the same principles of design and programming to help these facilities, these communities build facilities, and each one of these are built. As a side note, if you would, the Needham Station actually has a 5-lane range in its basement, in the lowest level. So from there we go to the test fits. Right, so now we've got the 2 programs. We're going to make sure and we're going to see if these will fit on the sites that are available to the town. First one here was the existing PD site. That program, we utilize similar stages. We don't develop a floor plan for this specific department because these are quick fits for feasibility, for viability of the site. We use something that's very similar in size and footprint, so we know it's going to be the same operation generally. Pieces and parts are going to be located in the general same vicinity to test fit on those sites. So as you can see here, the PD was far too large to be able to keep the existing building or even stay within the existing site, so we expanded into the neighborhood. Basically, it's a known site environmental areas, it's a known location for the PD. Kind of the cons of this site was limited building area and the cost of acquiring neighboring property, and the loss of that tax revenue was a factor as well. Likely, we want to look at the fire department, excuse me, and that was already a tight site. And now you're taking a building that's substantially larger, trying to fit that on it. And as was part of the last presentation, you would have had to acquire neighboring property in the downtown area, one of them being the post office. Just site was too small, expansion was beyond capable within the site. Again, not enough parking in the downtown area. This just accommodates a building that doesn't even accommodate the parking needs for the regular career department as well as that volunteer department as well. You know, just, it didn't fit. So we very quickly, from there, move on, and we start looking at some of the other properties. Cops Hill property, as you can see here, as a combined public safety, it doesn't work. It doesn't, it can barely fit. We're well within the 100-year, 100-foot buffer. So with a built portion of the building, and then the circulation and the site requirements for the combined facility didn't work there. It was marginally better when we looked at it as just the fire station. So, and what I mean by that is the fire station building could fit, but the operations and parking were so far dispersed that it didn't make effective response in that scenario. Especially for the call, excuse me, I keep calling them call, but it's the volunteer department.
Did you look at it for police only?
I can't recall. I apologize.
That was 2019.
There was, yeah, a few years ago. Yeah, I believe we did, and I think it was a very similar situation because of the parking requirements and the things of that nature, but I'm gonna have to go back and take a look.
But Jake might know, was it looked at for police alone?
The issue that we felt most confident in is that the magenta line that's cutting through that section there, to the left there, thanks Tom, that's the upland review area. So building with that in area is possible, but once we got into this general kind of test fit that the property had too much upland review area that we wanted to try to resolve in a mitigation to try to, as we tried to design around that. And this L-shaped portion of the site really only led itself to allow for parking, but the operational kind of street appeal or curb appeal didn't have the operational space that for either one of the buildings.
Right, so then police was considered as a standalone there.
It was talked about as far as either or, but we were looking at, as Todd had mentioned, we did a deeper dive as a combined space, because in our process, we had already looked at a combined, given some of the reasons that Todd had mentioned earlier about order of magnitude, some savings along with combining the facility.
Got it, and I don't want to drift into Q&A, this is just a point of clarification. So it seems to me that there were discussions about putting a single state police. May have been discussions, but it was never part of the test fit.
Right, so,
Got it, that's okay.
yep, there's some other.
Okay, but is there a point of clarification? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
quick point of clarification, because you answered for the overall project, but for KBA's scope that they were hired for, were they enabled to look at separate buildings, or was it a combined building concept and we want to do the architecture? It's a point of clarification.
Yeah, you can call anything a part of
No,
clarification. Go ahead.
but I don't know the answer. I'm just
Yeah,
the lawyers.
They were hired to do both individual and combined.
Okay,
But
That's it.
as we got into the feasibility and site analysis, we realized and felt that it was a better opportunity to combine.
Okay.
Not that we did not look at each one individually, but we had already made a commitment into the feasibility in early, mid-2020-ish, that we were looking for a combined
okay.
opportunity.
So it's 7:47. I don't want to rush you guys, but I would like the committee to be able to get into Q&A around 8 o'clock. So can you be fulsome and be done by around 8?
I will give it every effort.
You got to do both.
Yep.
Right?
It's 3/4 the way through.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So Danbury Road site, as you can see here, we still face that upland review, that 100-foot setback. This is as a combined facility, works very well, works okay. Has the same potential as a fire only, and potentially a police only, because it does have that 5-acre mark, but it was felt to be complex because of the permit. The next was Diane, I always get the pronunciations. What is it? Dinez Field. I apologize for always pronouncing that incorrectly. But you can see we test fit up on the upper section, up on the lower section. The topography on this scenario was extremely challenging, as well as very limiting for response for both departments from from the site in this location. And then on top of that, being a field and park area, felt as though it wasn't going to be well received. So we very quickly moved on from that to the Veterans Park area. You can see the combined facility. The facility starts to become very long to address the site here. We got the parking requirements, minimal property transfer. Still have to deal with some of that. And then, the cons of it, if you would, are the public opposition to what that would be, and then the concerns about responding to the downtown area from this site. Leads us to the old quarry. Now, I can honestly tell you this site was spun like a clock multiple times. I think we have something like 27 scenarios that we tried. So I will go through these pretty quickly, but there was more sitting on top of the site, if you would. No acquisition costs. Obviously, steep, rocky topography was one of the cons, but no acquisition costs in the central area that we wanted the response from, and the site was big enough to be able to house everything. One of the things you will note here is this early rendition, that dark area, and I think this stuck even up into the February referendum request, was a parking structure. That took care of a lot of the requirements for the police department's outbuilding needs, went into that parking structure. And it was a single deck parking structure that helped with the topography. So as we kind of rotate the building around, different scenarios, lowering the building, raising the building, spinning the building around, finally the one that we saw in November, which stepped the building into the site. So we used, all of these were flat first level, second level, third level, previous renditions. This one here, we kind of worked the building into the site. So what, as we talked about, this had an at-grade level as well as the main entry had an at-grade level, so it was kind of built into the hill here. Our site selection process, we then take, after all of those test fits, develop the pros and cons. We put this into a database. The database is filled with words, and we basically try and take those words and put it into a very simple kind of yes, no, and neutral comment. So very simply, red is bad, green is good, yellow is the neutral. And what came out in that, subjective decision was kind of Quarry Road was first and foremost, had the most green. Second was yellow in that. And then I think Danbury Road, you'll see here, has the second most amount of green with only a couple of red items being the site development cost as well as neighborhood impacts. That's what ultimately led us to the old Quarry Road site. All these items that are listed here prior to. You can kind of see the response map, or I should say heat map for calls for service. All of that basically centered around getting between these two dense areas with the old quarry site. Cost, I know there was a lot of question about cost during the last go around. These are real as recently as, that was about June of last year, numbers. And this was a very large project, which is why you see that number. What we're trying to show here is a couple of things. Efficiency and scale. Larger buildings get smaller dollar per square foot. Smaller buildings are getting higher dollar per square foot. And we average that out, and then you can kind of see the cost of construction as it has grown through the years. Very simply, the building in 2016, and this was relative to some of the, compared to some of the neighbors. We want to make sure that we're looking at that rising construction costs, the percent increase over the years. So a building that was built in 2016, if you take it to today's numbers, it is 82% higher today, but that same building will be 82% higher today than it was when it was built in 2016. And then just same graph from the past presentation, cost of increase. These are actual projects that we have worked on, completed, bid, and built. So that you can see that's not just a theoretical line, it is hard numbers that we've had over the years, and it's just a rising cost of construction. So,
Outstanding.
did I finish?
Wouldn't
Give 5 minutes with time to spare.
Outstanding. So why don't we let you folks sit down again, and we'll let the committee rearrange itself. And what we're going to do is start the Q&A portion of today's meeting, Q&A from the committee. And what I'd like to do, Mr. Scalzo, you're entitled to say pass if you don't want to start, but I was going to go around the horn this way.
That's it.
All right? So, go ahead, sir.
All right, a couple questions I had. You mentioned the initial questionnaires. I'm curious, how many times subsequent to that did you meet with police and fire to discuss the plans?
Oh, wow.
I guess what I'm looking at is whether
You mean the program document?
you've got the questionnaire, and then you kind of put that all together and you spit out whatever that was, your document.
Sure.
How many times subsequent to that did you meet with police and fire here in town and get feedback on that?
Oh, on that, Doug, so, wonderful question. And I'll answer, obviously, because I do the police programming side. I'll let Bob answer for the fire. Once we get that questionnaire, we take an initial stab, probably a bad term to use, we take an initial pass at creating a program that's going to fit your need. We use the organizational chart of the police department along with the answers to the questionnaire to generate a document that we can sit together at the table and look at and review. And then that meeting takes place, we go back, we refine it, and we have probably about 2 or 3 more meetings to come up with what's the final all-inclusive PD program. So that just generates the spreadsheet. From that spreadsheet, and that was completed very quickly at probably late summer of 2019, numerous meetings with the department to review locations, adjacencies, operational flow, to make sure that that floor plan that ultimately everybody saw, and it was a conceptual floor plan,
Right.
Was going to work for supporting the department as opposed to the department having to adjust for the building.
Okay, all right.
So on the fire side, my memory isn't clear as to how many times we met. I know that typically I have 60 hours of time into creating the program. And I would guess there had to be something in the order of magnitude of half a dozen meetings, which would have been 2 to 3 hours each with the committee. So we'd have the
With
meeting.
the committee? Your committee, internal committee?
No, the fire department.
Fire department committee?
Yeah. So we'd have a meeting, we'd go through, we wouldn't make it all the way through the questionnaire in one meeting. But whatever we made it through, then I would send them that written up with the sample floor plans that reflect that. So they'd have that to look at, and we'd move on. So in the second meeting, we would review what we just did, and we'd go to the next half a dozen rooms or so. The initial questionnaire has, I don't remember, more than 50 potential rooms in it, because there's, each department has a different idea of what they need,
Right.
and we just either go out. And some of them are quite fundamentally, so for instance, you have an interesting arrangement here because you have a combination of volunteer and career guys. You have to explore what are the shared spaces, because sometimes the career guys don't want the volunteers sharing their living space, because they think that the volunteers are just going to come in and leave dirt in there for them to clean up, et cetera, et cetera. So those all get talked through. And that's all. Did I address what you were asking?
My general question is, I just want to know how much, after they gave their questionnaire, how much input and how much review each department got, how well, and I guess I could find out from them how well it was socialized amongst their members, but.
I'll tell you one of my goals, which I tell them at the start, that we want to do this thing thoroughly enough, so that when the program is done, if you moved away and you didn't come back to the ribbon cutting day and you walked through the building, it would be familiar to you.
Okay. I get two questions.
Yep.
Um,
You don't have to use both at this time.
You mentioned on the Dinez Field piece that you were concerned about the access on that road. I'm assuming that's the road we're talking about. I think that's, what is that, east, that's not, what is that, East Ridge? No. What road is that in front of Dinez? Prospect Ridge, yeah. All right. One of the questions, one of the issues that's come up in in our meetings here was a similar question with regard to Quarry Ridge, and that was Leegee. And the fact that Leegee has absolutely zero space if there's cars on there, for somebody to pull over so the truck can get through. I was just curious whether that was whether you guys looked at that.
So I want to clarify the statement that I made, and thank you for pointing that out.
Okay.
When we're looking at that access, road access, we're looking for any emergency facility should have a minimum of 2, but preferred 3 ways out, so that if there was an event at any one of those access points, it is the police department or the fire department isn't stuck at home base trying to get out. So an example would be an accident blocking the traffic in front of the apron. The fire department has a way that's not taking their trucks off-road to circulate around and still respond to somebody, a call out from the general public.
Okay. All right, so. All right.
It's less about the roadway that it gets to, it's more about getting to the roadway.
All right. All right.
Thank you. Pamela?
I just have one point of clarification. When you were talking about the police training rooms,
Sure.
and you were showing the limitations of the current police training room, and you spoke of free seats. My understanding is that because of the limitation in size of the current police training room, that they do their training at other facilities. Whereas the free seats would come if they had a larger training room, they could actually host instead of have to pay to go to training.
Correct.
Host and then get free seats for our folks, and other people would pay to come in. So there would be some amount of training seat and or travel expense offset to having it.
You hit the nail right on the head, because I was going to clarify that, because that is a burden to any department in any community, that when you have to send your firefighters or officers off-site, you're paying for their mileage, their time traveling A to B and back. So that coming in-house becomes a very large incentive to most communities that we're working with to say, okay, and the magic number for a lot of agencies is 40. And when I say agencies, that's usually the private vendors. FBI will actually come and give you free seats at 50 or 60. So you think we want to try and play the balance game with most of the communities. Where do you want to go? How do you see this area in the building working for you?
So there's technically over time a cost savings to building a more properly sized training room.
Correct. Yes.
I'd like to talk to them too, because I realized we should have had a slide about the fire-related training. You know, in all of our buildings, there's a variety of things, a bailout window, confined space, which is like a manhole, and a number of different things. There's an area called the mezzanine in the apparatus. Those things reside up there. And it means that these trainings can happen spontaneously. Somebody comes back from a fire and they're having a discussion, this or that must be handled well. They don't need to go off to a special training facility to do it. And you don't have to pay them overtime to go someplace to train. They can get a very large fraction of their training done right in the building. If there's a tower-like element, there's hose evolutions up the stairs that get done, there's rappelling coming down the center, and every one of our stations has that. There was a thing there about the FEMA design manual that featured our training features, and I'm sorry we didn't have a slide to show.
And my understanding also is that a regular cadence of training and retraining and keeping up with things is a mandate. It's not an option.
That is true. Not to mention how just morally important it is to have these people know what they're doing. Because it's physically demanding. You know, the bailout thing, you go out the window head first, onto the ladder. And you have to practice going out that way and turning around and going feet first down this ladder.
No, thank you.
I see the exact same thing when I first saw him do it, so. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Dennis?
So what percentage cost savings is perceived with the combo building as separated out? Because the square footages, they're close now, so there is some.
There is some. I wish I had that number in a better grasp on that, what that number was, because yes, you do see the square footage, the square foot saving. It's tough to be able to quantify is not only do you get the square foot savings, but that efficiency and scale, as I said. So if you're, and when you use somewhat theoretical numbers, but they're based in a lot of projects that we just finished last year. When you're looking at an individual police station or an individual fire station, you're upwards of $1,200 to $1,300 a square foot right now. However, when we're combining that, we're looking at $1,000 a square foot. And when you're talking, even $50 to $100 a square foot in that size facility, you're getting some significant savings. Where that efficiency comes from is a lot of the behind the scenes type items. The mechanical units don't scale up necessarily like the property. Right? The property, if I take the site was 3.5 acres, well, when we combine the two facilities into one, we're able to go to 5 acres instead of the 7 acres. That same level of effectiveness happens not only with HVAC air handling equipment. It happens with your electrical service, it happens with your generator, it happens with your water supply, your fire protection system, all of that. And it's real tough to be able to quantify it, but those are the things that come into play in getting you that scale down in the dollar per square foot, the cost of the project.
The chart that had the cost per square foot, it's pretty easy to see the impact of doubling the size in terms of the reduction in the cost per square foot.
Okay, and then I know that you're working off of a conceptual drawing, but like how, I work in construction, so we start from really never conceptual. It's usually 30%, 50%, 70% in IFC drawings.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we look at. So like what is, my concern is the cost, how with conceptual, is it just based on square footage, or do you really see any variations as you scale up? Because I'll be honest, in my line of work, which is energy and infrastructure, it changes quite dramatically as you're going up through the 30, 50, 70 to IFC drawings. Do you see that in this situation, or do you feel like you've been doing it long enough, you're pretty solid on the numbers?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly before I answer, because I don't want to answer what I think you're asking unless it's accurate.
Okay.
So what you're asking is basically from conceptual, is our dollar value consistent all the way through the end? Or, and if I'm understanding you correctly, at your early stages, you have X dollars, and then at the next stage, you may have X times 2, and then at the stage after that, it may be, you know, X times, you know, even another 2. Is that, am I?
Yes, I think the end question, I'm trying to see if, because there's been a lot of concern that we've heard about, it was a arbitrary number. That was what we've heard. I'm not using that.
No, and we heard that a lot in the public forum. It seems like an arbitrary number. And what we shared then, and I will share today and every day going forward, we don't, as architects, myself, Bob, we don't estimate. Okay? We leave that to professional estimators. We hire a third party, and I know, you know, Jake and the town hired their own independent who came together.
Okay.
That's the normal process for us in our industry. And we work with folks consistently. So I'm not bringing in somebody new that's working with us for the first time to ultimately cut their teeth to give me a number for this project. They're familiar with what we put into our buildings. So even though that they're conceptual, they're pretty darn accurate at $1 per square foot. And then they have the dreaded word of contingencies, but they're a design contingency. That design contingency is to account for everything that they're not reading on the drawings, that they know they're using.
So risk is built in.
So it is built in, and I will honestly go on record that only once in my 27 years of doing this have we ever had to go back out, and I think I said this during a public presentation, have we ever had to go back to the town to ask for additional money, whether it was a conceptual level estimate or not, or further on down the line. And that community actually buried their high school that had caught on fire in the ground, and they had just drifted contaminates through the soil. So completely unforeseen, nobody could have anticipated it. That's the only community that I have ever seen have to go, for us, have to go back and ask for additional money.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to also just one thing. Because of the way that the programming and detail schematics are done at a high level of detail rather than the bubble diagram kind of approach, there is almost never any enlargement of any of the rooms. You know, we're used to laying out the rooms and knowing what the clearance is around the equipment and all that. So there isn't a question later about did we have to add footage to the building.
Is that Dennis? Dave?
Oh, I have 20 more, but.
You have 20 more.
Yeah. On the design of the building, obviously the buildings we have now, we're really a residential building, the police station, right? I'm not sure what they designed in 1908 for the fire station at the time. Can you elaborate a little bit on the commercial aspects of this building? I mean, are we talking concrete decks, metal framing, as opposed to, we're not talking wood framing and anything along that, or you could potentially have a place.
So I will absolutely, you know, very simply, yes. Concrete structure, or concrete base, steel frame structure, and then in the apparatus bay, we're talking masonry infill, right? We want that longevity, we want that abuse resistance and the rigidityness, as well as easy to clean. And then in the office and living quarter areas, we typically would do metal studs, metal stud infill, you know, highly insulated, so on and so forth. You know, concrete deck for the floorboards, and build from that. On very rare occasions, and we usually do this in conjunction, not only that we don't make the isolated decision, consult the community, we get feedback from either the contractors or from estimators, we might put wood stud infill inside as a cost saving measure, a way to bring that cost down. But that's, all options are explored before we jump into that, to make sure that it's a lifelong building for the community.
I'd like to add that too, because in the work I do, the office area, we use wooden studs because of the thermal conductivity of the steel studs. We can get R values on those walls at 27 or 28, and at a comparable cost if we're willing to use wooden studs. So we'll explore that with you. It's just all of it. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I just wanted to, verify that. I appreciate that. It sounded like when you did your site fitting, right, and siting, you really only went to the road. Did we do any kind of off-site analysis to get back? Did the roads have to be widened? I mean, and looking at the estimates, I have to go back. I didn't recall seeing any of that, because there's been a lot of concern, traffic studying, can the trucks roll in and out? There's always, someone's taking their garbage to the dump, right, and, God forbid. But that off-site road work can add money. Was any of that looked at once you kind of narrowed or honed in on the final site selection?
I think the most that we did for off-site was the response map that was conducted. That was the extent of that charge and that request. Knowing that the trucks regularly roll down the roads of Richfield wasn't necessarily a striking concern from the beginning. It wasn't raised as a red flag by the fire department. It's not raised by a red flag by the fire department, DPW director, or the first selectman. We're not going to say that this is something that's impossible
Okay.
for them to do.
And I assume, Jake, you would have looked at that from a DPW perspective a little bit too, since your garage is right there.
Right, so a lot of discussion about that through, I'm sure you've all watched or even attended the public informational meetings we had. We did do a full-blown town traffic study. That would be part of the next process of permitting, no matter where it goes. But again, the fire department, as you all know, the PD's already out on the road. Fire department responding from there, they're already heading to that traffic area, the fuel depot, which is at the base of the hill there. I think to answer your question about connectivity to the road itself, the aprons, wherever this facility or facilities go, that would be the kind of the extent of engineering into the street, right? Making sure that we had the proper turning radiuses in and out of the property or properties wherever this happens. But no, we did not look at a townwide traffic study based on the fact that the FD is already on the road as it is.
But what I heard earlier, it didn't sound like, okay, we got this great building location, it works. Now we got to throw another $2 million on road improvements. It sounded like, and based on a lot of your other designs, right, in other towns, they're not coming out on some dirt road on the back, we're coming out on a normal use road, that it would work. And there might be some modifications, tuning up, validation, but it didn't sound, at least from your initial thoughts, that it would work.
There was nothing that, in our exploration, and we have, probably should have mentioned this in advance, but KBA has in-house landscape architects, and we have a few landscape architects that specialize in the public safety sector. So they are very familiar with the truck turning radiuses, the slope that they need in order to not damage the trucks as they're leaving and returning to the site. So we have plenty of really solid eyes looking at it, and if they're not raising a red flag to me that we've got a big concern here, then it's kind of business as usual. We just, like Jake said, when it comes time to the next phase, when we have to engage with those roads as part of the design, that's when we start to bring in the traffic engineer, but where the trucks are already there, they're already running up and down those roads, it's not raised as a major issue or an extreme hurdle for the project. So no large expense would have been expected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So the charge of this committee in 2026 is a complete clean slate, whether it's one building, two buildings, three buildings, four buildings, you know, whatever it is, we can think creatively. So I bring that up in asking about the project that you did. Did you consider, I saw the combined matrix, for example, for different sites.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on the site evaluation and needs assessment working group, which are combined in our charge for looking at that fresh. Did you do any work that we could, you know, see from the record and that'll help this committee in terms of looking at the buildings separately? Or more than two buildings, or any other significant change to the operating model?
No, not to the in-depth we're putting it into the matrix happened, because at that point, it had already kind of been looked at, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in stating this, Jake, but it already been kind of looked at the effectiveness of the combined facility, both from an initial cost as well as an operational cost. That was kind of the direction that the overall project was going at that point in time. Would it be overly challenging to look at those from an individual standpoint? No, because one of the things that we're looking at when we're doing that anyways, because we're already at the site, is does it make sense, like the Danbury Road? Could we have a single facility there? There's a high probability that that wouldn't be a major challenge for a single facility there. But to have it into a matrix at this point in time, no, it's not done.
Okay, got it, thank you. And as it relates to our fire department is somewhat unique, you know, professional and volunteer combined, and we have some remote parts of town, both you know, West Mountain Road area and also Branchville that are, you know, a little bit further away. And we have a substation up there that currently is being responded to by a fire truck for medical calls, you know, for example. So in the planning, how, if at all, did you know, Ridgefield's unique model, you know, we talked a little bit about the process of how fire came in, but how should the public be thinking about the way that Ridgefield does fire and EMS that should inform the design going forward based on your knowledge and expertise at Ridgefield? Fire, I mean, police is, it's, fire I know is a little bit more unique, so maybe that's a better question.
Just I'm not sure how to answer the question. I apologize.
So we respond to, you know, and think about the building design and that you put together and the ones that you considered for different sites, and, you know, all of this is forward-looking. You know, you have a lot of experience, as you mentioned, you've been passionately at this since '93. So thinking about Ridgefield, which has some unique qualities to how it operates, how should the public think about, you know, Ridgefield uniquely? And I just pointed out a couple things that I mentioned, such as, you know, we respond to medical emergencies with professional staff on fire trucks.
Sure. Well, I mean, most of the departments respond medically too. I may not, you help me out here, because I'm not sure how to answer your question.
I think if I can, I might be able to help with this one. I think what you're trying to ask is, and please correct me if I'm receiving this incorrectly. Right, we're designing based on one headquarters. You do have a current substation. What's the future hold beyond that? You know, such that if the community grows, what's beyond the one station?
Response time is top of mind in asking these questions. What our unique geography and what's responding and how it, all of this ties back to the facilities. So, you know, did you even consider doing anything with, or did you consider the Ridgeberry substation in your planning design, looking at the operational model? Did it come through when you were talking to the fire people? All of this is really just to inform going forward, so we understand what you may have learned that we can learn from as a committee.
I think, if I remember correctly, going back a few years again, but the Ridgeberry substation. The current substation was part of the conversation. Not that we were doing anything with it, but it was part of what fed response. And I think if I, again, I don't want to speak for the department, as they were looking at this, this kind of maximized their headquarters, right? And anything more above and beyond would potentially be, depending upon development, have to be, because that's the way fire tends to respond. They're responding from a stationary spot. So depending upon where the development was, there may be the need for a substation at some point in time, not in the foreseeable future. I think it was part of the conversations. But it was, the headquarters was predominantly responsible for the response at this point in time. And then depending upon the development, you know, where the population went in town, that a substation of some kind like the further down the road.
I was just going to add to that, because the history there is the initial feasibility component that we worked with KBA and hired KBA and Mitchell for. It wasn't to look at the operations of the fire department and how they serve the different areas. It was how do we improve the existing headquarters situation. And then as we got into this, there became questions kind of similar to what you just asked. How are we going to operationally, is this going to operationally change the fire department's response? And looking at it at a high level is, if we're to add another substation, say down south, and it didn't come up in KBA's feasibility component, but we're then looking at staffing completely differently now. So does it add more firefighters and EMTs on shift if we're looking to add for future growth down potentially, wherever, whether it's Branchville or some other component of the town. But that's kind of how we took the feasibility and site selection process from the initial 2019 studies that we did. But we weren't looking at studying, are we now going to reconfigure and add potentially a second or third substation? I don't know if they...
No, it's very helpful, because eyeballing the numbers that we've seen so far, like 70% of the calls are under 8 minutes, and then, the other 30% are over 8 minutes, and for emergency medical response, that's very meaningful.
Right.
And don't quote me on those exact numbers,
Right.
but eyeballing.
Right, and in that response, the heat map that is in the presentation today, the actual study from JB Consulting, I believe you guys were all copied on that as well. That gets into, based on a building being placed in on that full quarry, to show response times from that. And you can see it's clearly depicted where those how the response times are affected based on that specific location.
Right, and
Yep.
Things have changed. That was done in 2019, I think.
That was in like 22, 23, I'd have to remember the date for you, but it was in the process of this site selection that once we were on site, we had a lot of questions about, well, what is the response time from your new site comparatively to your old, to the existing site? So that's where that derived from. But I think that kind of adds to, I think, what you were going with your question.
I'm beginning to understand what you're really trying to find out. We did, Westport was one of our clients.
Okay, great.
Okay, and there was mapping of different, how would all of the needs be met around town? It's response time mapping from the different overlaps of those locations. A map like that can be developed based on a forecast of what growth in the here might look like in 50 years, or 20, you can pick any time in the future. And of course, there's a lot of guesswork as to where development will occur, but some of it might be pretty predictable in terms of the infrastructure that exists and the width of roads and stuff like that. And then the overlaps of response time maps could say, well, by 50 years from now, you're probably going to have a station here and one there, if that's what you're asking. And what does that say about, does that mean that maybe headquarters should be smaller by one truck or bigger by one truck? Is that really is sort of the goal?
I'm just trying to understand the factors that come into the facilities and stuff.
I just have one point of clarification on what you've been talking about, so that when you talk about mapping the future and population growth, I think you also intend to talk about aging for many of these calls and how the population will age over that period of time, even if let's say the population were static. and potentially, particularly in our town and a lot of towns, the people passing through. So Danbury and Norwalk may have a lot of population growth, which would impact us in some manner, as well as visitors to the town by some factor.
Yeah.
So, were you gonna say something?
I was just thinking back to when we did Hyannis, the visitors were the biggest number of people.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, we've been around the committee once. I just want to ask a couple of questions, and I want you to just understand where I'm coming from. One is, I would hate for us to reinvent the wheel, which means I want to make sure we get learnings from the prior work as we move forward. It's number one. Number two, I'm not as bright as my colleagues, so I ask very simple questions as to this, right? And the first one I have is this in one sentence, okay, one sentence, because I really got to wrap my brain around this, going to inform what we're doing. What drove the combined building concept? What drove it? One sentence. I know you can do it.
Try to combine all of that into one sentence is a challenge. Ultimately, it brings the departments closer together when they are already working together. There is efficiency in that operation, not only daily operations, for the collaboration between the departments, but also financially. And it's been a proven model, as you saw with a handful of our combined, that I think the town and the two departments said that can work for us.
Okay, so essentially it's three items there. One, the departments are already working closely together, right? The second one you said is that it's financially beneficial. And the third one you said it's been done in a few cases, right? All right, so, and just so as I wrap my brain around this, and again, I'm so, but it'd be great to have combined departments, but that's not the standard right now, right? Most fire and police departments are separate.
More are venturing to combined. More communities are seeing the effectiveness of being combined.
Especially in Massachusetts.
Especially in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Okay.
And proximity could lead to a more meaningful relationship between.
Yeah, a more meaningful relationship. Is there anything unique about our fire and police department that makes them particularly close or codependent as compared to other fire and police departments?
From an outside agency who's worked with quite a few, the already great relationship that the two departments have is just going to make that building operate that much more effectively.
Right. Yeah, what I'm trying to get to, right, ultimately here, and why I'm asking these questions is, I want us to get to done, right? And what done means is be able to provide for our community and our first responders, right? So me, for one guy, I'm just one vote here. Like, I'm not married to squat, and our charge doesn't allow us to be married to squat. So I just want to make sure that as we do this, and as we listen to the public, that we get to done. I want to get to done, right? So the second question I had, which sort of follows up on that, and again, my being a guy who doesn't, isn't as, simple, I want to be simple here. Did you ever get to a discussion with public safety leadership that said, come on, folks, let's separate between the nice to have and gotta have, right? It's like whenever you're renovating a home, right? My wife's in the audience here. It's nice for her to be here tonight, right? We had this discussion many times, right? And that sometimes, ends up in a must. Again, thinking where I'm coming from at this, and I'm going to shut up after this, right? To get to done. Did you ever have that sort of discussion?
Yes, and that's where, like I said earlier, part of that program reduction.
Right.
The police department very simply said, we can maintain our operations with the range the way it is, look for joint opportunities, if you would, something of that nature. So, yeah, they went back quite a bit to
Right.
say what, and we helped to drive some of that discussion
Good.
as well, to say, hey, we can dial back here to get you some more savings.
Right, right, so, so for instance, the gun range, right?
Mhm.
I mean, is it typical for a town of 25,000 residents with 40 sworn officers to have their own gun range?
Typical,
Yes.
I would say no, but not uncommon for that to be put on the table.
Yeah, an aspiration, right? And that's what I mean when I'm talking about that. And again, and I'll shut up now, but it's helping us get done, to do something that is reasonable for the taxpayer, reasonable for our first responders, and most of all, reasonable for the people that these folks seek to protect. All right, so Mr. Scalzo, you're up.
I'm going again? All right.
Yeah.
I guess something about your practice. What percentage of your work is done in a retrofit sense, where there's a building, let's say it's a 30-year-old building, something more modern. How much your business does retrofit?
It's surprisingly not as much as you would think, because nobody's replacing a 30-year-old police station. They're all well beyond that. They're built, 50s and earlier, if you would. Couple that come to mind right off the bat. Newtown, Connecticut was fortunate enough to find the Taunton Press,
Right.
or come up with a great deal on the Taunton Press.
Right.
Surprisingly, based on upgrades, and what I mean by upgrades is ultimately the police and fire are essential facilities. They have far more seismic requirements
Sure.
than a conventional business. Our initial thought going into that, you're not going to be able to say this building, we're going to have to knock it down. We were surprised as well. So it's often we're taken back a little bit by sometimes by what's available, but yes, that's the only one that comes to mind immediately as a building that was subject to be able to be renovated. And as I say that, North Attleboro Police Station was an older mill building that North Attleboro, Mass, that we converted to a police station for that community. So it's very seldom a station that is, or a building that they own and have that can be renovated.
So I've done quite a few in my career. My own house was built in 1804, when I bought it, it had plumbing and electricity. I'm used to that. But it is difficult to do in large part because of the lateral forces requirements. Generally, what we try and do is take the existing building and not put any essential components in it, so we can bypass. I think that Newton, Mass that we did, it's basically, we built a brand new station connected to the old station. The old station is headquarters building. And we've done that in a lot of places, and I've won a lot of awards for that. But it's difficult, especially if you're going to do something as complex as a combined fire and police. The opportunities to work around something and have nothing essential in that box is very slim, because it is true, you cannot take an old building and cause it to meet the lateral forces requirements of an essential facility. There's just no way to do it.
Like another.
Yes, you do, too.
I guess one of the things in relation to the consolidated building design, especially when it relates to fire, is there any strategic value to dispersed assets or disadvantage? Likewise, taking your firefighting assets and saying, having them in multiple places around town as opposed to concentrating everything in one
I
place?
think it's a labor problem.
Labor,
You get a lot, you end up with a lot more people.
that's the constraining factor. Okay. All right.
Pamela?
I just have one question, forgive me if Steve said this while I was out of the room. Is there a projection, a factoring for the costs that we've looked at over the next 5 years or 10 years, a way to factor that you feel solid about, as costs, I presume, will just go up?
Yes, they continue to go up every year. We are seeing a flattening of the curve, so to speak, especially over this last year. It has gone from a very steep arc to a little bit more level, if you would. But the average over the years, the average has been about 4% a year, and that is 4% compounded. So this year's 4% number is going to be, take that full number and put it on it next year. So it compounds year after year.
Right, so that 4% is what you think is appropriate now,
Yearly, yes.
going forward?
Yep. Yeah, the biggest anomaly in that was 2020 through 2022. And that was a supply and demand that caused a lot of that inflation.
And then my other question has to do with the site preparation at the Quarry Ridge. My understanding, I'm clearly not in the building, I don't have building background, but a goodly sum of the amount that was in the planning was for some rock blasting and some things that were quite unique to that site. Was there any way to resituate on that site to avoid any of that cost?
Very simply, the last plan actually eliminated a large percentage of that. And it was strategically done, as I had mentioned, where we were kind of nestling the building into the hillside. It was strategically done to avoid a lot of the rock outcropping. Understanding the town's named Ridgefield for a reason, you're going to have rock in this community no matter where we go, and we understand that. It's just it is what it is, and it's for the right size contractor, it's no different than digging a hole in dirt.
Sure, but it was considered and mitigated to the greatest extent you could.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dennis? I'm good. Okay. Sir?
Yeah, I got a couple. I look back at you were like 10 years old when we first started this analysis, okay? Way back. So 2002, right?
Yes.
There was you guys did your firm, I should say, did a at the police station. Now, there was an addition added onto that building at that time. I forget the size. You probably added 40% or something along those lines, right?
Before my time, yes.
Okay. Was that ever looked at again as you came back?
As we came back to the project, no, because it was deemed at that point in time not an effective use of time and resource, and not going to give the department enough space for operation. The needs of 2002, by the time we came back, I think we came back a couple of times between then, but by 2019, the needs had grown so far that it just wasn't viable.
Right, yeah, because it was crammed onto that site. Now, I know one of your siting drawings, taking the property next door, the house.
Correct.
Trying to keep the aesthetics and the architecture of the existing building, and what you were saying, Bob, about modern standards and lateral forces and everything else. I get it. You're talking a very old home. So back with the needs and the square footage, which ballpark double, roughly, right? Okay, from the existing facilities, and that comes from the space requirements and all the other components that you did a very nice job at explaining, which I had no clue on as a civilian. So I think that almost eliminates with that size. So that's kind of what you're saying there. So looking at that site is no good. So obviously, if we need 2 new buildings, a combined building is the absolute most efficient. That's easy. And I can go over, that's what I do, okay? We build and we do that analysis. And yeah, when you combine it, the skin costs and the roofs and everything else, it's a tremendous savings, combining two buildings together. Did we ever look at Cobb's Hill as just a police station? You have an existing building there. It's a commercial building. Now, I'm not sure what the inside structure is, if it's rated properly for the ratings that you may need. It just seems to have a lot of great components. It's probably a little oversized for the police. It's like 47,000. And you don't need-
36.
It's 46?
36.
36.
It's very close to what.
Oh, so yeah, and underground parking and a lot of other components. Was that ever looked at? I mean, that you wouldn't have to demo and go through what some of the concerns that you highlighted were, you know, the wetlands, the 100-foot setbacks, all the kind of stuff that is a pain, but
Be transparent, no, I don't think we ever looked at that as just a standalone PD using that existing building. It does get into that reinforcement scenario. Would it be viable? There's a possibility, but no, we didn't look at that building, utilizing that building as PD.
And just point of clarification, when you're talking about reinforcement for a law enforcement type building, you're really focused most on the lower structures, right? The top ones have to have some reinforcement, but not at the level of the lower floors, correct?
All the way up.
All the way up.
All the way up.
All right.
It's
Got it.
about 2.5 times that of a standard office building. Because you gotta resist snow, wind,
This stuff came from California. We're expecting earthquakes. It's overstated for what we live in here.
Okay.
We're compelled to deal with it. What's the age of that building?
Yeah, and that's okay. That was just a point of clarification. It didn't need clarification, so I'm sorry.
Is that a modern building in terms of steel structure?
I don't know enough about it.
It's relatively modern, probably 1990 or something.
So it could be reinforced with
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it's
Relative to other things.
It meets the building code, but I'll stop there. Adam, please.
Yeah, so again, with our charge from 2026, we can look at it fresh and looking back at the record for what kind of work might have been done so we can understand what we can stand on the shoulders of from sites that were considered. Could you, and maybe Jay can chime in here as well, like what sites were considered, you know, at all at the highest level, and then what sites were considered for, it had some work done on them, whether it was for, you know, a combined building, a standalone buildings, or otherwise, can help us understand what we may draw from what might be in the, you know, might be in the files.
Ultimately, what's in our files is all the sites that we presented up there. I don't believe that there was any additional sites that we were, that were shared with us, because again, it was predominantly combined. We wanted to be in that center core village region for the response for the combined.
We also discussed at a high level, and as Todd presented earlier, the square foot or the acreage that we needed for the buildings based on the recommendations from the feasibility study, is we started looking up and down the corridor of Route 35, and those parcels are all smaller, right? So if we're needing several acres to get even a building versus a combined building, the properties really just didn't support it unless you're looking at multiple property acquisition. And when you do that, you have to then start combining properties because you have to Z out property lines. So there's a component there of, there's a legal component for property merging that you have to address if you're acquiring multiple properties. So that's when we at the table said we're going to stick with these 7 or 8 sites that we went through. We felt as though we exhausted that kind of 35 corridor, staying within the village district based on that heat map that was presented earlier, that we were in the general area of where we wanted to be. We did also speak to the Merrill Lynch building, the Popsicle property, and then, hey, do you look at trying to purchase Pamby Motors in front and then combining that? And then we just felt that the cost of purchasing multiple sites there at that corner of Cops Hill, Farmingville, Route 35 just would have been too costly based on what we knew was happening at Old Quarry.
Got it. So a related question, we
talked a little bit earlier about an implication for labor at substations and so on and so forth. Have you, in other towns and other projects that you've worked on, built some substations? And maybe you could talk a little bit more holistically, and counsel us about what that entails.
So we're doing in Woburn right now, a substation would be 2 or 3 truck bays, and half of those is 8 bunkrooms.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
6 to 8 bunkrooms.
Okay, thank you.
You know, so the standard, I don't know what you guys have as personnel per truck, but it's moving up, I think, to 4 as a requirement, based on a conversation I had today driving over here with somebody who's on one of those committees. So 2 trucks, 8 bedrooms, you know, a living space, dining, meeting, TV watching space, and then support spaces. So I think that would add up to 10,000 square feet or something like that.
Are there any alternatives to deploying an ambulance in a structure that doesn't involve what you just mentioned, that anyone is doing anywhere?
I'm not following that.
Could you have the truck bays without the sleeping quarters and still
Oh, no,
operate?
you need it, well, so if it's a volunteer department, you don't have to have those sleeping quarters, except they then wants to have something for stormy weather when they're sleeping over. If you're a career department, they have to sleep there, because time is the issue. So it can save lives. So you can't have to drive all over that station to get in the truck to go back out to respond. That's what I believe is true. I mean, the fire chief would be talking to that more than I am. So any substation we've done, and Woburn is a perfect example, because they're just being done right now. That's exactly what I described. And you know, it's got its own little decon laundry, and it may have an air bottle fill, or maybe they'll decide the bottles need to go to headquarters to fill. These things get negotiated. But you certainly need a decon laundry, because they come back contaminated, they have to deal with it. There's typically some sort of office space. There's what we call a radio room, communication room attached to the bay with a debugging apron, bathrooms, storage room, mechanical room, small computer room, a gym. So it adds up.
Yeah, typically what we're finding is the substation is where can range anywhere between approximately 10 to 16,000 square feet, depending on what's going on.
Thank you, Adam. Sure. What I'd like to do at this point, if it's okay with the committee, is looking, given the hour that we have, is to do the following. Certainly, if you have a question that must be answered now in this forum, please ask it. But I would like to leave the door open that we may invite the gentleman to come back and talk to us again, or do it by Zoom, if that's okay. If we're all right with that on the committee?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank both of you for running the gauntlet. I really appreciate it. This kind of stuff is never easy, right? But it's the way the sausage is made in good old-fashioned New England democracy. So,
Can I ask one last question?
You're like the kid.
Yeah.
At the end.
One more thing?
Yeah, one more thing.
Yeah, I mean, putting all this together, and I know you can't have an official recommendation, what would you do? What some overall guidance? Do you have any forward-looking guidance for us that could help knit us together for the public? And what we do?
I'll give you a condition, financially constrained.
Financially constrained.
And subject to an election.
Yes.
Right, that has lost twice, and the second time by a lot more than the first time, and recognizing that what I understand from our public safety community, what they're looking more than anything else, is not to make it all the way up to the 21st century, but just get them out of the 19th and put them somewhere in the 20th, hopefully the second half of the 20th.
Right.
Okay, well, the last thing you said, there's a problem. You know, OSHA requires you to have a building that's safe for the people who work in it. And it's hard to bypass that. And, you know, I mentioned in one of the presentations I do is the liability of having an unsafe station. And I have 2 lawyers help me put it together because litigation is a real concern.
You did a study?
It was a presentation that I do.
Can you share that with us? Would you mind sharing that with us?
I would present it to you. I don't want to provide you it without me explaining the
Okay.
images.
Great.
I'd be happy to do a Zoom meeting with you.
So we'll do a Zoom. So I think that what we're looking for now is Adam would like an answer. What would you guys do with the constraints that Brother Scalzo and I just put on you? You know, what would you do? And here, I'm going to modify it because I have such amazing power as the chair of this committee. Can you try to do it in a paragraph?
Sure.
Either one of you guys.
If I were to look at this and our approach as KBA, and I think Bob has been the same, well, we wouldn't be working together if we weren't in the same boat. We look at this as if it's our communities. We don't come in as if we're trying to, sell you the, waterfront property in Arizona, right? We look at this as stewards for your community as members and partners in the community. So ultimately, if I was even going to be doing it, sitting in your seat in my town, I would be looking to make initial cost as well as operational cost as effectively as possible. And our experience in that is a combined facility does that the best. Now, you also have to weigh into that your response out into the community. I get that. This is part of what we do. So it has to be in the right location. Those 2 components have to mesh to be right. If it's not meshing to be right, then obviously you do the next best thing, which is put the fire department, which requires that proximity in the right location, and the police department can ultimately go anywhere in the community because they are out rolling and patrolling. But you still want that civic building to be visible and out and easily located in the community.
Thank you.
Answer the question?
Yes, I think it does. No, seriously, I really do think it does, and it's very helpful. So that'll close out that item of the agenda.